Mister, are you my dad? That question hung in the air, thick with the hospital's disinfectant smell at 2:47 in the morning, like a bullet driving straight into Knox Mercer's chest. He stood rooted to the floor, staring at the two 7-year-old girls trembling in front of him, long black hair brushing their shoulders, gray eyes like the Chicago sky before a storm, the exact eyes of the woman he'd been searching for 7 years. Your voice sounds like the recordings on Mom's phone, one of them whispered, her words shaking. The saved messages Mom listens to whenever she cries. Knox's hands started to tremble. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man who made the entire underworld bow its head, was trembling because of two 7-year-old children. Two beautiful, terrified children who'd called him in the middle of the night because their mother had suddenly collapsed. They were looking at him as if he held every answer in the world. And maybe he did. Maybe the answer was already written across their faces, in the hard angle of a jaw, in the way they tilted their heads when they thought, in the stubborn look that refused to cry even while they were afraid, just like him. "We think," the other one spoke up, her voice threaded with a fragile mix of hope and fear, "we think you're our dad." And Knox Mercer, Mafia boss, man who held the lives of hundreds in his hands, felt his empire beginning to crumble, because the math was too simple. 7 years old, 7 years ago, the truth was too clear. And the woman who'd vanished from his life 7 years earlier without a single explanation had been carrying his children when she ran. But I'm moving too fast. Because to understand how a midnight phone call could resurrect a love story buried for 7 years, you need to know how it all began. You need to know about the night Alara Sinclair's world fell into darkness. About the woman who worked 3 jobs to raise her children, who gave up every bite of food so her 2 little ones could eat, and who still listened to the voice of the man she loved every night before she fell asleep, even though she'd left him behind. And you need to know about 2 small, brave daughters who quietly found their father's phone number and made a decision that would change the lives of 4 people forever. If you've ever had to face a truth you weren't ready to accept, stay with me, because what happens next will break your heart and then stitch it back together in ways you never saw coming. Press like if you believe in second chances. Share this with someone who needs to hear this story. And subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories that touch the heart. 30 minutes before that moment, the small apartment on Chicago's South Side was still sunk in silence. Alara Sinclair pushed open the worn door, the hinge giving its familiar squeal in the late-night quiet. She'd just finished her shift waiting tables at Tony's, her feet aching after 8 straight hours on her feet, the smell of grease and food still clinging to her faded black uniform. The cramped 1-bedroom apartment greeted her with the pale yellow glow of a table lamp Luna had forgotten to turn off. Her 2 daughters were sleeping soundly on the double bed they'd shared with their mother for 7 years now. Black hair spilled across the pillow, faces peaceful in sleep. Alara stood still and watched them for a moment, her heart tightening with love and with guilt. These children deserved more than this. More than an apartment with cracked walls and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. More than dinners where their mother had to pretend she wasn't hungry so they could have the food. More than the life she was able to give them. Alara untied her apron, and her eyes drifted to the small table in the corner where a stack of online graphic design books still lay open. She'd completed 60% of the course, stealing every rare free minute between 3 jobs to study. In the mornings, from 5 to 9, she cleaned office buildings. In the afternoons and evenings, she waited tables. On weekends, she babysat for the neighbors, all of it to raise her 2 girls, and to save for her own small dream. Beside the stack of books sat an old leather-covered notebook where she'd written down plans for opening Sinclair Bakery, recipes she'd tested, cost calculations, rough sketches of the shop she imagined, and on the last page, one number had been underlined. $2,340. 3 years of saving every spare coin, every small tip, every cut she could make. That money would have been more if she hadn't been robbed last month on her way home at midnight. They'd taken every dollar from her wallet, nearly $400 in tips she'd saved all month. Alara hadn't called the police because she knew it wouldn't help. She'd simply started again, quietly, the way she'd been starting over for 7 years. She moved softly to the bed and picked up the exercise notebooks her girls had left on the nightstand. Luna had finished every math problem in neat, careful handwriting, and she'd even added a small note. "I did the advanced ones too because the regular ones are too easy." Alara smiled. The child was frighteningly smart, always asking questions, always analyzing, always trying to understand the world through her own logic. Violet's notebook was the opposite, filled with little scribbles in the margins, flowers, houses, and a family of 4 holding hands that she'd drawn again and again, more times than Alara could count. 4 people. Always 4. Alara traced that drawing gently, pain blooming sharp in her chest. Violet had never stopped dreaming of a father. Alara set the notebooks down and went into the tiny kitchen to prepare breakfast for the next day. When she opened the refrigerator, she saw there were only a few eggs left, a little milk, and bread that was close to its expiration date. She'd have to go shopping on her day off. She'd have to recalculate this week's spending. She'd have to try harder. She reached up for the pan on the high shelf, and that was the moment the world began to spin. Alara blinked, trying to focus, but the tiny kitchen seemed to tilt and sway around her. Her head throbbed, her ears rang, and her legs suddenly didn't have the strength to hold her up. She tried to grab the edge of the table, but her hand slipped. The world collapsed in a single instant. Alara's body hit the cold kitchen floor, her head striking the corner of the wooden cabinet with a sickening sound that echoed through the sleeping night. She lay there, motionless. Dark brown hair spread across the worn tile, eyes squeezed shut. In the bedroom, Luna sat up first. She was a light sleeper, always alert even in sleep, as if 7 years of uncertainty had taught her she could never fully let go. The strange sound from the kitchen made her heart kick hard. "Violet," Luna shook her sister. "Wake up. Something's wrong." Violet's eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep, and before she could understand anything, Luna was already pulling her out of bed. The 2 girls ran into the kitchen, and the sight in front of them froze them both. Their mother was lying motionless on the floor, a thin smear of blood spreading from the wound on her forehead where she'd hit the cabinet corner. "Mom!" Violet screamed, tears spilling instantly. She threw herself beside her mother, shaking the unconscious woman. "Mom, wake up! Mom, please!" Luna stood there for 1 second. Only 1 second. Long enough for terror to rip straight through her 7-year-old heart. Then something inside her shifted. Someone had to be strong. Someone had to act, and that someone would be her. Luna drew in a deep breath and ran to grab her mother's phone from the table. Her hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver as she dialed 911. "Emergency," she told the dispatcher, a steadiness in her tone that felt almost unreal for a 7-year-old. "My mom fell in the kitchen. She's not waking up. There's blood on her head." She gave the apartment address clearly, word by word, answering every question the dispatcher asked, while Violet sat beside their mother, sobbing as she kept shaking the unconscious woman. "Mom, wake up. Mom, please. I'm so scared. Mom." Violet's crying was heartbreaking, but Luna didn't have time to cry. The dispatcher said an ambulance would be there in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It sounded like an entire lifetime. Luna ended the call and dropped to her knees beside her mother, placing a hand on Alara's chest to feel her breathing the way she'd been taught in the first aid class at school. Still breathing. Mom was still breathing, but 10 minutes was too long, and the 2 girls were too small, and the apartment was too empty. Luna looked around as if she might find an answer somewhere in the room, and that was when she remembered. "Violet," Luna called to her sister, and something in her voice shifted. "Do you remember the number we saved in Mom's phone last week?" Violet lifted her head, eyes swollen and red, tears still sliding down her cheeks. The number of the man in Mom's box?" Luna nodded. A week earlier, when their mother had gone to work the night shift, the 2 girls had accidentally found the box hidden in the deepest back corner of her closet. A small wooden box packed with secrets. There were photographs of a man with blue-gray eyes that looked cold, yet turned strangely gentle when he faced the camera. There were handwritten letters, yellowed with age. There was an old business card with the name Knox Mercer and a phone number, and there was a white handkerchief that still carried the faint trace of men's cologne, even after all these years. The 2 girls had sat together for an hour, turning over each photo, reading every line they could understand. And they'd realized one thing. This man had eyes exactly like the eyes they saw every day in the mirror. This man had features they could recognize in Luna's own face. "This is our dad," Violet had whispered that night, her eyes blazing bright. "This has to be our dad, Luna." Luna hadn't argued. Her logic had fitted every piece into place. Mom never talked about a father. Mom hid that box as if it held something too painful to face. Mom cried every night when she thought her daughters were asleep. And Luna had heard her open her phone, heard her play the same old voicemail again and again. a warm male voice filling the dark. That night, Luna had done something she never even told Violet. She'd taken the phone number from the business card and saved it into her mother's phone, labeling it Knox, not because she planned to call, because she wanted a backup plan, because she'd learned, after 7 years of living on the edge, that there always had to be a backup plan. And now, kneeling on the cold kitchen floor beside her unconscious mother, Luna knew it was time to use that plan. "If he's really Dad," Luna said slowly, holding her sister's gaze, "then he'll come." Violet stopped crying, staring at her sister with a thin, fragile hope. "Do you think he'll really come?" "There's only one way to know." Luna unlocked the phone, found the name Knox, and pressed call. Her heart hammered as she waited. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Then someone picked up, and a man's voice came through, deep and cold in the night. While Luna spoke to the stranger in a voice that trembled but still tried to stay calm, Violet did the only thing she knew how to do whenever she was afraid. She reached for the notebook and pencil on the table and started to draw. The lines were messy in the pale yellow light. 4 figures holding hands, a woman with brown hair, a tall man, and 2 little girls in the middle. A family. The family Violet had never had, but had never stopped dreaming about. She drew as if she drew it enough times, hard enough, the wish would come true. And maybe, just maybe, tonight it really would. Somewhere else in Chicago, inside a pitch-dark office on the top floor of an upscale nightclub, Knox Mercer sat behind a gleaming black oak desk, the only light in the room coming from a desk lamp and the open laptop screen in front of him. The clock read 2:17 in the morning. But for a Mafia boss, night had never been meant for rest. He'd just finished a tense meeting with his men, settling a territory conflict on the south side of the city without spilling blood. Tristan Cole, his right hand, stood by the door like a silent shadow, waiting for the next order. Knox was reviewing financial reports when the phone on the desk began to vibrate. He glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number with a local Chicago area code. A call at 2:17 in the morning was rarely a mistake. A cold, sudden intuition pricked at the back of his neck, a feeling he hadn't felt in 7 years. For 7 years, he had paid detectives to tear through all of America looking for a woman who had vanished like a shadow, leaving no digital footprint or active phone line that could ever be traced. 7 years he'd woken night after night with her shape in his dreams, and opened his eyes to the emptiness she'd left behind. And now, the silence of his past was being shattered by a mysterious caller at 2 in the morning. Knox picked up, his voice deep and guarded, the instinct of a man used to midnight threats. "Speak," he commanded, though his heart hammered against his ribs, for a reason he couldn't yet explain. But the voice that answered wasn't hers. It was a child's voice, a little girl, trembling and frightened, yet trying to stay calm. "Mister, Mom fell. She won't wake up. I don't know what to do." Knox sat up straighter, every thought of business dissolving in an instant. "Who are you? Is your mom Laura Sinclair?" "Yes, sir. I'm Luna. I'm 7. My sister Violet is 7 too. We're twins. Mom fell in the kitchen and there's blood on her head and the ambulance is coming, but I'm really scared. And I found your number in Mom's phone and I don't know who you are, but 7 years old. Twins. 7 years old." Knox's mind did the math at a dizzying speed. Ilara had left 7 years and 9 months ago. If these children were 7, that meant they'd been born about 7 years ago, which meant Ilara had been pregnant when she disappeared from his life, which meant Knox shot to his feet, the chair skidding back with a loud scrape. Tristan moved instantly, ready to act. "Address," Knox said into the phone, his voice steady again, even though a storm was tearing through him inside. "Give me your address." Luna recited it. An apartment building on the south side, one of the poorest parts of Chicago. Knox signaled Tristan, and he understood immediately, rushing out to get the car ready. "Listen to me, Luna," Knox said, his voice turning gentle in a way Tristan had never once heard in the 10 years he'd worked at Knox's side. "I'm coming. I'll be there in 10 minutes. You keep the phone with you and talk to me, all right?" "Yes." The little voice grew smaller. "Mister, are you my dad?" The question felt like a physical blow to Knox's heart, leaving him momentarily breathless. He couldn't answer, because he didn't know the answer. Or rather, he was afraid of it. "I'm coming, Luna. Keep talking to me. Tell me about your mom." And the little girl told him. For 10 minutes, Knox sat in the car while Tristan drove like a madman through Chicago's empty streets, and Luna told him about their life. About the tiny one-bedroom apartment where the three of them slept in the same bed. About how Mom got up at 4 a.m. to go clean offices. About how Mom waited tables late into the night. About how Mom always said she wasn't hungry so her daughters could have the food. About how she'd been robbed last month and lost all her savings, but didn't cry in front of them. About how she still tried to study online every night even when she was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. Each sentence felt like a crushing weight on Knox's soul. A grim catalog of the suffering he had failed to prevent. Alara, the woman he'd loved like madness 7 years ago, had been living like this. She'd been raising his children, because he was certain they were his, in poverty and loneliness for 7 years, while he lived in silk and power, unaware that somewhere in this very city, his own flesh and blood had been going without, meal by meal. "Mister," Luna's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, Luna," Knox said, his voice catching. "I'll always be here." The car stopped in front of the hospital entrance, and Knox bolted out before Tristan could even turn off the engine. He ran through the automatic glass doors, the sharp sting of disinfectant hitting his nose, the harsh fluorescent light slamming into him after the darkness of Chicago. He scanned the crowded emergency lobby, his heart hammering in his chest, and then he saw them. 2 little girls sat huddled on hard plastic chairs in the corner of the waiting area, small and lost among the adults moving back and forth. One of them was sniffling, clutching a notebook tight against her chest. The other sat with her back straight, eyes fixed forward with the wary focus of someone who'd learned too early how to protect herself. And Knox couldn't breathe. They had long black hair brushing their shoulders, black like his. They had gray eyes like the Chicago sky before a storm, the same eyes he saw every day in the mirror. Their faces were a perfect blend of him and Alara, his stubborn jaw, her soft mouth, the way they tilted their heads when they thought, exactly the way he always did. These were his children. No DNA test, no extra proof needed. Knox knew it in every cell of his body. This was his flesh and blood. He walked toward them, his legs heavy as lead, his heart squeezed tight. The girl who was crying, it had to be Violet, looked up first. Her wet gray eyes met his, and then her whole face lit up as if the sun had risen in the middle of winter night. "You came." Violet sprang up and ran toward Knox, her small feet slipping on the glossy hospital floor. She crashed into him, wrapping her arms around his leg as if she was afraid he might vanish. Knox stood there, frozen for a moment, not knowing what to do. He'd faced the most dangerous enemies in Chicago's underworld without a flicker of fear. But now, a 7-year-old girl was clinging to his leg and sobbing, and he had no idea how to respond. Then instinct took over. Knox slowly dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around her, feeling her tiny body shaking against him. Violet cried into his shoulder, and Knox realized this was the first time in 7 years his heart had truly felt like it was beating. "I'm here," Violet said through her sobs, still holding on to him. "I drew this for you, for Dad." She handed him the crumpled sheet of paper she'd been clutching since they left home. Knox took it, and what he saw made his eyes burn. A hurried pencil drawing, 4 figures holding hands, a woman with long hair, a tall man, and 2 little girls in the middle. Above it, in messy child handwriting, were 2 words, family. Knox couldn't speak. He only held Violet tighter, feeling her tears soak into his expensive shirt. But not both children welcomed him. Luna was still sitting on the chair, not standing, not running to him. She watched Knox with cool gray eyes, assessing, analyzing. Eyes far too old for a 7-year-old. Eyes that had seen too much, that had been forced to be strong too soon. Knox held Violet on one arm and stepped closer to Luna. He meant to kneel down to her level, but Luna spoke first. "If you're our dad," she said, her voice not trembling but not warm either, "then why didn't you find us for 7 years?" The question was a sharp sting of accusation that Knox had no defense against. He didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but it wasn't good enough. He didn't know. He hadn't known they existed, but what did that matter to a child who'd grown up without a father? "You're right," Knox said, his voice low and honest. 7 years is too long, and I don't have any reason good enough to explain it. Luna frowned, clearly not expecting him to admit it instead of making excuses. "So what do you want?" "I want to prove it." Knox knelt down, one arm still holding Violet, his eyes locked on Luna's. "I know you don't trust me. I understand. If I were you, I wouldn't trust me either. But give me a chance to prove it with what I do, not what I say. Luna tilted her head, the exact way Knox always did when he was thinking. Prove it how? By being here. By not walking away. By taking care of your mom, and taking care of you and your sister. Knox drew in a slow breath. I'm not asking you to call me Dad. Not yet. You can decide when you're ready. But I'll be here. I promise. Luna stared at him for a long moment, gray eyes picking apart every line in his face. Then she spoke, still cool, but a fraction less rigid. A promise doesn't mean anything if it isn't kept. I know, Knox said, so I'm going to keep it. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't move away either. And for Knox, they sat in the waiting room through the hours that followed. Knox in the middle with Violet curled up in his lap, and Luna beside him, still keeping her distance but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her small body. The doctor had told them Alara had been taken into the emergency room for tests, and all they could do was wait. In the quiet stillness of the hospital, with the time creeping toward 4 a.m, the two girls began to tell him more about their life, and each story felt like a deep cut into Knox's heart. Mom wakes up at 4 every day, Violet said, her voice steadier now that she'd cried herself empty. She cleans offices until 9, then she comes home and takes us to school, and then she works as a waitress until really late. Luna added, her tone calm, almost like she was reading off a report. On weekends, Mom watches Mrs. Patterson's baby next door to earn extra money. Mom says every dollar matters. 3 jobs. Alara worked 3 jobs to raise the 2 children she had given birth to and raised alone. Knox's fist tightened, the pressure in his chest turning into something that felt like it might crush him. Mom always says she isn't hungry, Violet went on, her eyes dropping. At dinner, she only eats a little and then says she's full, so the rest can be for us. But we know she's lying, Luna said softly. Sometimes at night, I hear Mom's stomach growling. She's really skinny, skinnier than all the other moms at school. Knox felt his eyes burn. He was one of the richest, most powerful men in Chicago. He lived in a mansion with meals cooked by a private chef, and meanwhile, the mother of his children was going without food, so they would have enough. Last month, Mom got robbed, Luna continued, and for the first time, her voice trembled. On the way home after her night shift, they took all the money from her wallet, almost $400. Mom cried all night that night, but she thought we didn't know. Violet nodded. Mom has a notebook where she writes down her savings. I saw her cross out a big number after that. She was really sad, but she didn't tell us. Knox wanted to scream. He wanted to smash something. He wanted to find the men who had taken Alara's money and make them pay. But he did nothing. He just sat there, holding Violet tighter, and listened. Mom's studying online, Luna said, and for the first time there was a hint of pride in her voice. Graphic design. Mom says when she finishes, she'll get a better job and we'll have a bigger home. Mom wants to open a bakery, Violet added. Sinclair Bakery. She already drew the whole design. It's really pretty. Knox closed his eyes, trying to swallow the pain rising in his throat. Alara was still Alara, the Alara he'd loved. Still tough, still full of dreams, still refusing to quit no matter how cruel life got. But why? Why hadn't she come to him? Why had she chosen to live in poverty instead of telling him these children existed? He could have given her everything. He could have given them everything. A big home, enough food, the best schools, safety. Instead, Alara had chosen to disappear, chosen to carry it all alone, chosen to let his children grow up in a cramped apartment in the poorest part of the city, not knowing who their father was. Anger flared in Knox, hot and violent. He was angry at Alara for not trusting him, angry at her for making a decision for him, angry that she'd let his children suffer when he had more than enough to give them everything. But deeper than the anger was the pain. Pain for 7 years lost. Pain for the first steps he hadn't seen. The first time they'd said dad that he hadn't heard. The birthdays he hadn't been there for. Pain that the woman he loved had chosen this life instead of a life beside him. Mister? Violet's voice cut through his thoughts. Are you crying? Knox lifted a hand to his face and realized his cheeks were wet. The most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago was crying in a hospital waiting room in front of 2 7-year-old children he'd just met. It's okay, he said, his voice rough. I just wish I'd been here sooner. As they sat there waiting for news about Alara, Knox couldn't stop his mind from drifting back into the past, back to the years that had shaped everything that came afterward. 9 years earlier, he was 28, freshly inheriting the Mercer Mafia empire after his father's death. And Eclipse was one of the most luxurious bars he owned, a polished legal front for the business that truly kept his world turning. Alara had walked into his life on an autumn night, 19 years old, a second-year art student working part-time to cover tuition, and she was unlike anyone Knox had ever met. She didn't lower her eyes the way others did. She didn't flinch when she looked straight at him. She treated him like an ordinary man, not a king of shadows, and it intoxicated Knox from the very first glance. They began seeing each other in secret, because he didn't want to drag her into his dangerous life. To Alara, he was simply a successful businessman in real estate and entertainment. He kept her away from late-night meetings, tense phone calls, the darkness he faced every day. The 2 years they loved each other were 2 years Knox felt like he was truly alive. Alara brought light into a life drowned in night. She painted his portrait, canvases he still kept locked in his office safe even now. She sang while she cooked, laughed when he told ridiculous stories, cried at sad movies, and never tried to hide her softness from him. She was his home. Knox had bought a diamond ring, hidden it in the office safe, waiting for the perfect moment to propose. He had planned everything. A romantic dinner on his private yacht, red roses, and the question he'd practiced hundreds of times in the mirror. But that perfect moment never came. One night, Alara showed up at his office without warning, planning to surprise him with a newly finished painting, and she saw what she was never meant to see. Knox was dealing with a traitor, blood on the floor, a gun in his hand, and a cold, merciless face he'd never allowed her to witness. Alara stood there with wide, horrified eyes, the painting slipping from her fingers, and Knox saw the instant her heart shattered, the instant she realized the man she loved wasn't the man she thought he was. She ran before he could explain. That night she didn't return to the apartment they shared. The next day she vanished, leaving only a short message behind. "I'm sorry, I can't. Don't look for me." Knox tore through all of Chicago trying to find her. He hired the best detectives, used every connection, offered rewards to anyone with information. But Alara seemed to evaporate from the earth. He didn't know that 7 years earlier, only a few weeks after she left, another man found her before he ever could. Raymond Mercer, Knox's uncle, a 50-year-old man with an ambition to control the Mercer empire his nephew now held. Raymond found Alara in a small cafe in the suburbs, where she was trying to rebuild her life, and he brought news that would change everything. Alara was pregnant. She'd only learned it a few days before, and she was lost, unsure what to do. She still loved Knox, even as she was terrified of who he truly was. She was considering going back, telling him about the baby. Raymond destroyed that possibility. He showed her photographs, images he fabricated of a woman and a child murdered, and he told her this was what happened to anyone who brought weakness into Knox Mercer's life. "My nephew doesn't need a child," Raymond said coldly. "In this world, children are weakness. And Knox hates weakness. He already knows you're pregnant. He sent me to handle it." Alara trembled as she stared at the blood-soaked pictures, stared into the eyes of the ruthless man in front of her, and she believed him. She believed him because she had seen Knox that night, cold and brutal, a killer who didn't blink. She believed him because fear blurred her reason. She believed him because she was only a 21-year-old girl, pregnant, alone, and panicked. "Disappear," Raymond said. "Change your name. Vanish. If you show yourself again, I'll kill you and the child in your belly, and Knox won't stop me." Alara ran. She changed her name to Alara Sinclair, taking her mother's maiden name. She lived off the grid, no social media, no credit cards in her own name, no trace that could be followed. She gave birth to 2 children alone in a small suburban hospital, named them Luna and Violet, and swore she would protect them at any cost. For 7 years she lived in fear and poverty, raising her children on meager wages, never daring to contact anyone from her past. And through all those 7 years, she never knew she'd been deceived, that Knox had never wanted to kill her, that the diamond ring still lay in his safe, waiting for a day she might come back. The quick, urgent sound of a doctor's footsteps pulled Knox out of his memories. A middle-aged man in a white coat approached, his expression serious but professional. Knox stood up, still holding Violet in his arms, and Luna rose beside him. "Are you family for Miss Alara Sinclair?" the doctor asked, eyes on the chart. Knox nodded without hesitation. "I'm the father of these 2 children. How is she?" The doctor looked at the girls, then back at Knox, as if weighing how much he should say in front of children. Knox understood and turned to Luna. "Can you watch your sister for a moment?" Luna nodded, taking the drowsy Violet from Knox's arms, and the two girls sat down again a few steps away. Knox moved farther off with the doctor, his voice dropping low. "Tell me the truth, miss. Sinclair is severely depleted," the doctor began. "Chronic anemia from long-term malnutrition. But the more dangerous issue is that we've found a fairly large ovarian cyst. If we don't operate, it could rupture at any time and cause internal bleeding. We need to take her into surgery immediately." Knox felt the blood in his body turn to ice. "What's the success rate?" "About 75%. The doctor answered honestly. "This is a complicated operation, and her overall health is weak because of malnutrition. But if we don't operate, her chances of survival are much lower. 75%. That meant a 25% chance Alara wouldn't make it.